Jeffrey Dahmer's parents are the two critical building blocks that we need to help us assemble the puzzle that is Jeffrey Dahmer. We need to examine both the relationship that they had with each other, as well as the relationship that they each separately had with Jeffrey. Here's what we know about Joyce Dahmer. Her father was an extreme alcoholic, and her parents were engaged on a regular basis in fighting with each other. They were very self-involved with their own drama. It's safe to say that Joyce was therefore exposed to a lot of intimate partner violence, whether it was emotional or physical or psychological abuse. When children grow up in environments such as these, they are at risk for developing PTSD, depression, and anxiety, and they're also at risk for choosing partners in the future that resemble an abusive parent. So while Joyce didn't choose a man who was absorbed by alcohol like her father, she absolutely chose a man who was very self-absorbed and absorbed in his own academic studies. Here's what we know about Lionel Dahmer, Jeffrey's father. As a youth, he was totally absorbed with the idea of murdering people, thought about it all the time. He thought and obsessed about homemade explosives and tried to make homemade bombs. And he also nearly burnt down his neighbor's garage because he was a pyromaniac. He was very destructive and full of rage. He was a self-proclaimed pyromaniac. He had an insatiable sexual appetite, and he had deep-seated feelings of inferiority. Lionel, for whatever happened in his childhood, was full of unresolved rage and had extremely destructive tendencies. Someone who obsesses about how they're gonna murder people or how they're gonna blow things up likely has a fair amount of sadism going on underneath the surface. Question is, where did Lionel put all that unresolved rage? Now getting back to Joyce. I believe Joyce was already pretty fragile when it came to her sense of self given her childhood, and she was probably looking for a man that didn't look like a severe alcoholic. And at first glance, Lionel, being the seemingly non-threatening academic that he was, she probably thought she was making a healthier choice. He's not an alcoholic. He's an academic. A wolf in sheep's clothing. As Joyce stated herself when she was interviewed, had Lionel just told me that he was into obsessing about murdering people or blowing things up or lighting things on fire, I would have never married him. Yeah, but she did marry him, and quickly thereafter became pregnant with Jeffrey. We know that Joyce was really stressed out during her pregnancy. We also know that she took medication due to the stress. But what I find curious is that we don't know what the environmental conditions were that were actually causing the stress in the first place. I believe that this is where Lionel's unresolved sadistic tendencies or sadistic fantasies started to emerge. I believe that Joyce was the target. I believe that Joyce came into the relationship suffering from low self-esteem given her childhood. And when individuals suffer from inferiority complexes, like Lionel Dahmer states that he had, when you're coupled up with somebody who has low self-esteem, you start to get kind of repulsed or irritated with them because they mirror back to you your lower feelings of self-worth. And so you start to attack it. And a lot of times this is where we do see narcissistic abuse, such as gaslighting. In the Shrine of Dahmer, Jeffrey admits to witnessing Lionel physically hitting Joyce during arguments. We hear from Lionel, not Jeffrey, that at some point during their marriage, Joyce pulled a knife on Lionel. So we know that Lionel was physically violent towards Joyce, and we know that Joyce and Lionel were constantly fighting during Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood. Even though Lionel paints Joyce to be crazy and unstable, he didn't want the divorce. She wanted the divorce. We also know that the court sided with Joyce, and that everything was given 100% in her favor. She was granted full custody, and that the court stated that they granted all of this in her favor because of the extreme cruelty of Lionel Dahmer towards Joyce Dahmer. And that's in writing. We also know that Joyce Dahmer was diagnosed with postpartum psychosis, which is characterized by extreme confusion, loss of touch with reality, paranoia, delusions, and disorganized thought processes. But guess what? These symptoms are identical to the symptoms that we see in individuals who are victims of a type of narcissistic abuse called gaslighting. Lionel Dahmer has evidenced narcissistic behaviors such as entitlement, vindictiveness, manipulation, and bullying. And he's painted an innocent picture of himself when it comes to the treatment of Joyce. But I don't buy it for a second. It's likely that Lionel tortured Joyce psychologically and emotionally and gaslit her on a regular basis, so it's no wonder that she wound up in a psychiatric ward for a month when Jeffrey was 10. I believe that this type of psychological control and manipulation was a huge part of what caused Jeffrey Dahmer to downward spiral because he was witnessing this for 18 years. In the next video, we're going to look at the ways that intimate partner violence, whether it be psychological, emotional, or physical, affects the fetus, the infant, and the youth growing up in an environment like this, and how it specifically affected Jeffrey Dahmer. I'll see you in part 2.